We're on to our next panel, which is a new one for this conference. It's a regulatory expert review. For those I don't know, my name is Chris Marangi. I'm Co-CIO for Value at Gabelli Funds. Cut my teeth as a media analyst. Our current lead for media is Hanna Howard, who you've seen before, and Sergey Dluzhevskiy, who you just heard from, who's a fellow portfolio manager and also focused on telecom. So our honored guest today is Rob McDowell. Rob chairs the global communications practice at Cooley LLP. Before that, he was a commissioner with the Federal Communications Commission, nominated by George W. Bush in 2006, renominated by Barack Obama in 2009. Unanimously confirmed by the Senate both times, and did many things at the FCC, but is in particular known for leading the efforts to auction two of the largest spectrum auctions in history, as well as playing a key role in the digital TV transition, which we can barely remember now in 2009. But the Dukies in the room will be pleased to know that he's a committed Blue Devil, class of '85 as well. Sports is another panel. We'll start with regulation, far more interesting, and a lot of interesting news developments over the last day with, as has been mentioned already, Commissioner Symington, a Republican, and Commissioner Sparks, a Democrat, both stepping down as of tomorrow. The latter was, I think, known. But will be 1-1 until we get presumably a second Republican sometime in July. So maybe you could just start by talking about how effective can the commission be at 2-1? What's the timeline to a full 5-person commission? And maybe just broadly outline priorities for Chairman Carr. I know it's a lot there.
Other than that, yeah, there's nothing. First of all, thank you very much. Great to be here. Many thanks to Gabelli, and many thanks to the Harvard Club. I did bring my U.S. passport just in case that was required. And thank you, Harvard, for knocking Duke off as being the most hated alma mater in America. So really do appreciate that. So, yeah, there's a lot going on at the FCC. A surprise announcement by Commissioner Symington to step down suddenly as of Friday. We assumed he would be stepping down maybe by the end of the year. He had long said that he would not leave Chairman Carr without a majority, but here we are. So a 1-1 commission means nothing new or novel. That's a commission term, which I don't like because new and novel mean the same thing. But new and novel can't be done. So no new rulemakings, no M&A that requires a waiver of the national TV ownership cap. I see people hit their keyboards.
Yeah.
No, until you get a majority. There is something called a board of the commission, which can be assembled. It hasn't been done since the 1940s. I'm getting a spam call, so let me hang up on them real quick. No, it's not. It's actually a very important client, but he's going to have to wait. There's chatter about that in the trade press today. I would discount that heavily. We think Olivia Trusty could be nominated or confirmed by the end of July before the August recess. The Senate is very consumed by the reconciliation measure right now. And while the FCC is the center of my universe, it's really not the center of Congress's universe. So there might be other nominations that have to be processed. And the Democratic senators are putting holds on almost everything, including like the ambassador to the Vatican. Like, who cares? But they're putting a hold on him. So they're certainly going to do that for Olivia Trusty. And that consumes floor time and energy, and it has to rise towards the top. Majority Leader Thune was asked yesterday, does the Symington resignation and abrupt departure mean that the trustee confirmation will move towards the top of the pile? And he gave some vague term that the trade press is trying to put make work very hard, those two words that he said. So we'll see. Hopefully by the end of July, you'll have a 2-1 commission. But if you're Chuck Schumer, you're going to really demand a Democrat be nominated. Then there's the whole question, I know we don't have time, regarding will there be any Democrats on these, what used to be called independent agencies. So,
but is 2-1 sufficient to make changes to the cap, for example?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Anna Gomez, who I know, she was my law partner at a law firm, knows that she does have the nuclear option. So I was in this position myself as a commissioner when it was 2-1. I was in the minority, and you cannot show up and deprive the commission of a majority. Then there's this board of a commission type thing you can do. So she can try to gum it up if she wants, or will she play ball? And if she just disagrees with something, she dissents. Hopefully that's the case. But for everyone in the room, you got to bake in these weird contingencies too, because we are in the era of weird contingencies actually becoming reality sometimes. So.
Hanna?
Yeah, so I think we'll talk through some of the different priorities and focus areas for Commissioner Carr and the FCC at this point. But deregulation and M&A are obviously coming into focus, especially on the broadcast side of things. What do you view as the top priorities and issues for the FCC from where we sit today in terms of broadcast regulations, modernizing those, and then from there, I have a few more follow-ups.
Sure. So, and cut me off because I know we have limited time, so if I blather on, each of those questions could be an hour. So the commission, let's assume for a minute you have a fully staffed commission, which we don't, but is waiting for the Eighth Circuit to rule on the 2018 quadrennial review of its ownership rules, broadcast ownership rules. That is, we think, a late summer, August, September, maybe time frame, maybe as early as July. We're not sure. You never know with the appellate courts. The commission needs to know what the court is thinking and what the mandate is from the court before it can proceed with the 2022 quadrennial review. Here we are in 2025. So that's got to wait. The Chairman Carr has enunciated publicly a lot of thoughts regarding a deregulatory agenda. So loosening of the local ownership caps, let's just either radio or TV, but we can focus on TV for the time being. So how many stations can one owner own in a market? How many stations do there have to be in that market? He, I think, is probably in favor of pretty loose rules. I think he understands that broadcasters' lifespans can be extended and have to be extended through consolidation, right? The twist, which you didn't ask about but is relevant, is where does the U.S. DOJ Antitrust Division stand? So Gail Slater, I know quite well. She, I think, understands that over-the-air TV broadcasters compete against other media for eyeballs and ad dollars, but the career staff at DOJ has this religious belief still that they don't, that a local TV spot ad revenue is you only compete against other TV stations in your geographic market. So if you wanted to have 2 or 3 stations in the same market, the career staff, I think, is going to have problems with that, and she's going to have to do a bit of a cram down. That hasn't been tested yet because we haven't seen a major deal like that come through that's really noteworthy. Then there's the national TV ownership cap. That's a separate proceeding from the quadrennial review because it was set up separately statutorily back in 2004. And there will be a rulemaking. There are questions regarding how far can the commission go to loosen that or just get rid of it. The chairman has said he wants to scrap it altogether, that it shouldn't exist at all anymore. I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about this years ago. It doesn't matter public policy. I think it's really stupid. But we'll see. That'll get appealed, by so-called public interest groups.
Okay, so looking like there's a lot of optimism that 39% cap will probably get eliminated. Local ownership rules will get relaxed.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about what the implications would be for the local broadcast group? I mean, obviously, consolidation would open up. Where do you think that space will be in the next 3 to 4 years should these rules change? How many local broadcasters will there be in that scenario?
Excellent question. By the way, I should have said at the beginning all my disclaimers, which I'm not going to reveal anything that's material and non-public or privileged and things like that. So there we go. Yeah, we're all your compliance people. So not talking about any specific deals or specific broadcasters here or any clients, certainly. But there's a lot of chatter. You've seen a lot of press about various station groups that are either going to swap stations and or combine or get pieces of larger station groups consolidated here and there. And there's a lot of pent-up demand. So the last FCC was very hostile towards broadcast M&A, as you may have known through the Standard General Tegna deal that was effectively killed by the last FCC for really no good reason. So that completely inhibited M&A, not just with broadcasting, but anything FCC approved. So you're going to see a lot of activity soon. I think one reason you haven't as of June the 5th, I thought it would have been sooner, but and is now public, there were a number of network affiliation agreement renewals underway that sort of delayed things. So, what your costs are, how much you're paying the networks, et cetera, has a lot to do with that. And so I think, and also there was volatility in the capital markets for a while, which delayed thinking for a while. But I think you're going to start seeing more deals emerge. And I don't think there's going to be any coordination as to who goes first or which deal comes out first. and you might see smaller swaps first because that's just easier from a business perspective to negotiate, and then the larger, more controversial ones come a little bit later.
So do you anticipate that a lot of this will start to pick up before the 2026 political cycle, or when, kind of timeline-wise?
It would be my hope, and it's certainly our plan to have those all consummated and approved well before the 26th cycle.
Coming right up. And then sticking with broadcast, but moving towards retransmission consent and negotiating authority, some commissioners have floated the idea of allowing broadcasters to negotiate directly with the virtual MVPDs. What would this mean for the legacy broadcasters, cable networks, and distributors? And then how realistic are potential caps to reverse network comp? I know there was an op-ed that went out.
Commissioner Symington,
yeah,
who's now leaving.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so we can maybe delete that from our files. But but the Chairman Carr, has spoken out several times in the past few months, especially about network affiliate relationships. There was the letter to Bob Iger he sent December 21st, for instance. That's noteworthy. There was a CNBC interview about a month ago where he mentioned this several times during the CNBC interview. So he's concerned about that. He's concerned about the effect on local news in smaller, mid-sized, smaller markets, rural markets. The only newsrooms there, he says, are, because newspapers are gone, are local TV news. If the tornado's bearing down on your town in Oklahoma, you only have one source or maybe two sources to find out where to hide, right? So, so I think it's going to continue to be a priority for him. How he gets there, and there's a lot there loaded in the word it. Is there the right for individual stations or station groups to negotiate directly with streamers, let's say like a YouTube TV. Right now the networks take that in their contracts with affiliates and do that for them. So I think he wants to try to do something there. I think that it is sustainable on appeal, by the way. The commission under Section 303I, for those playing at home, actually has in a Supreme Court case from the 1940s, has pretty clear authority to do that. But there's also the notion of, are the networks effectively controlling, and this is something he's talked about again, the affiliates, and so the FCC has legal authority there too. So there's a lot that he can work on, but it's going to take some time, and that's a next year thing. Before he's got to have a majority GOP commission. I don't know if Ana Gomez would vote for such things. She may not. There's a lot of public interest arguments to be made to go forward there. So, but Carr himself, now on reverse retrans, which is a bit of a misnomer. These are really affiliation fees because retransmission consent is a per sub of MVPD thing. These are flat fees that the affiliates pay to the networks. I don't sense that that's really actually a priority for most broadcasters to cap that as much as it is for them to be able to negotiate their own rates.
Okay, that's really helpful. Chris?
Yeah, so you touched on deals with respect to station groups. Two of the higher profile deals before the commission, of course, are Paramount and Charter's announced acquisition of Cox. I don't know if you care to share any perspective on those. And in particular, and I add this last night, can Paramount even get approved at 1-1?
Paramount can get approved at 1-1 because it could be a bureau action. So the conventional thinking, which is inaccurate, is that you need commission votes of either high-profile mergers, only if there's something new or novel. This is the Skydance proposal is a simple transfer of control of licenses. They're not already a broadcaster. There aren't other issues at play. So it should be approved on bureau action. So that's something that you do not need an FCC vote of the commissioners to get done. Obviously, as I read in the newspapers, there are some political elements surrounding that deal, and we'll see how all that plays out, and also the patience of Skydance, right? So how patient are they going to be? And if this is not the deal, and we don't represent either one, but if this is not the deal for Paramount, then it's a melting ice cube, and what will be the next price? Who would be the next buyer? So what was the other part of your question?
Charter Cox.
Yeah, Charter Cox, yeah. I haven't seen any problems with that one, right? So cable mergers, by definition, you're not buying a competitor, you're in other territories, and it makes a lot of sense as a business matter, for sure. Back to the antitrust division, I don't know what the antitrust theory would be to block it, but it's still a legitimate question to start asking. But from an FCC perspective, I don't see an issue there.
And just, speculating here, obviously in the realm of possible, you're going to have the chessboard changing a bit with the spinoff from Comcast, a potential separation at Warner Brothers, maybe some other things. Is this commission, you think, more open to vertical consolidation?
I think so.
horizontal control.
Overall, I mean, the big X factor, just to talk about the elephant in the room, is the Trump factor, right? What's going to be out on Truth Social here within seconds, perhaps, to change my answer. So bake that in, obviously, and I know all of you are. But I think as a general matter, especially with traditional media, I think the FCC is going to be a little bit more laissez-faire and allowing different experimentation and combinations because that's how the marketplace has to evolve.
Great. So, Rob, I have a few questions on telecom. My first question is on spectrum. So obviously the budget reconciliation bill includes several provisions around wireless spectrum, including plans to auction at least 600 megahertz of spectrum over 6 years, and also restoring spectrum auction authority for the FCC. So as you look at the tasks that the FCC, NTIA, Department of Commerce have in front of them, which spectrum bands you think are going to make the 600 megahertz that they're planning to auction over the next 6 years? Which bands might be auctioned sooner rather than later? And also, there is an expectation that a lot of it will come from the governmental agencies, including Department of Defense, who has been slow to part with spectrum. So maybe your thoughts on how this administration would do things differently to speed up the process.
Excellent question. And by the way, interrupt me because that was a huge compound question there, so there's a lot to it. The House version, as you said, targets 600 megahertz worth of spectrum to be auctioned. The FCC auction authorities lapse for about 3 years. One would think that a uniparty control of the House, Senate, and the White House, regardless of Democrat or Republican, historically this has been a bipartisan issue, would want to restore FCC auction authority. We thought that would happen in late 2022, and strange things happened. One of those strange things, though, was this growing divide that's at least a decade old between Department of Defense and other federal users of spectrum and the private sector. And the Department of Defense sees it as a one-way ratchet. They've only been losing spectrum and haven't gotten anything in return. So you have the Armed Services Committee members really dug in, and in the Senate in particular, where it's easy to do that. So Senator Rounds, Senator Fisher, Senator Wicker, and he serves on both, and Senator Sullivan, I'd put him in that camp as well. He serves on both the Commerce Committees and the Committee and the Armed Services Committee. So it's really unknown. I mean, I think there will be auction authority restored. Will it be just a simple clean reauthorization, in which case there's not much to auction in the pipeline, as we call it, and that lowers the Congressional Budget Office score, the yield of money, the estimated yield that would come into the Treasury for these auctions. And so that's the fuel that drives the hopes of passage of a larger pipeline. The Cruz bill, which Chairman Cruz, Ted Cruz of the Commerce Committee, is much more ambitious regarding how many megahertz have to be enumerated at auction. I don't know which ones will get auctioned first, right? I think that, I mean, I don't know how many spectrum nerds are in here, but there's a lot of talk of the 4 and the 7. The lower 3 is out. And I just don't know. That could segue, and I'll plant the seed later if people want to talk about EchoStar, I'm sure, which I'd love to talk about. I don't know which ones would get auctioned first. And I think the ones that do get auctioned first aren't going to be that big a deal. So,
yeah, great. Right. Another important topic for the industry and for investors is focused on broadband subsidies. And obviously we have a large $42.5 billion broadband subsidy program bid that is on hold, reviewed by the Department of Defense. They're doing a detailed review to remove, quote unquote, unnecessary rules and mandates, improving efficiency, taking more technology neutral approach. And I think most recently, yesterday at a Senate hearing, Commerce Secretary Lutnick made some comments, but basically the program has been in review since March. So what is your take on where things stand with this program? What are some of the rules or rule changes that you're expecting to materialize, and also how states would respond, what the timeline is, And what are some of the factors, I guess, that would influence the ultimate split between fiber, fixed wireless, satellite, and if you care to provide an expectation, what the split could be?
So I think there is a sense, a priority from this administration to get going with BEAD, right? There were a lot of strings attached by the prior administration. I think they would like to remove some of those strings. There are a number of states who are further along than other states, let's say Louisiana, which kind of was out of the gate first. And that's to get political here, that was a red state, a Republican governor who worked really hard to get that done, right? There is still pressure from industry to make it all of the above and not just fiber, so wireless, fixed wireless or whatever, even mobile. I think you might see more of that. I think there's an understanding that, look, you had J.D. Vance when he was in the Senate and other Senate Republicans pushing for extension of the ACP, which was the subsidy program during COVID. For your wireless connectivity or whatever, your telecom connectivity. So there is, these subsidy programs for broadband have had bipartisan support over the decades, and you will see money start to flow again into these areas. Will it be less restricted, less regulated? I think so. Exactly when or what the split will be, I can't predict. But it was encouraging to see the Letnick testimony yesterday that he's aware of it. He does not have his assistant secretary for NTIA, the Department of Commerce, Ariel Roth, confirmed yet. So this is part of the confirmation palace intrigue criminology, and as to when she gets there. But you do have Adam Cassidy, who came from the FCC as the deputy assistant secretary, and he's in charge of that. So
great. To get even more into the weeds, I think my last question is going to be on USF. So obviously, in March, there was a Supreme Court hearing on the case where plaintiffs are basically claiming that the Universal Service Fund tax levied or the mechanism of collection of USF is basically unconstitutional. So, I mean, it has to deal with the third-party organization, USAC, collecting this or doing the process for the FCC. But, I mean, we had those oral arguments. I think the court will probably rule at some point this summer. So kind of a similar question. Your thoughts on where things stand, what your expectation is of the ultimate outcome, and if the outcome is kind of negative for the existing USF, what are some of the alternatives or contingencies that you think your clients and industry broadly and also Congress would look at in terms of reforming the USF or putting it in a different kind of more sustainable place?
So the fact that it's June, early June, and we don't have a decision usually portends with a Supreme Court case that it's a split decision, that they're working on their concurrences and dissents and passing a lot of paper around so they can write against each other. In this case, that may or may not be the true because oral arguments weren't that long ago, to your point. Look, I read the Fifth Circuit. I'm leaving all client hats. I'll take them all off here. I read the Fifth Circuit decision. It was horribly written. It was written by some clerk who did not make law review somewhere at some law school, right? It was horribly written. So, and I was trying to give this person every benefit of the doubt, and I'm not just being an institutionalist with the FCC. So, but that doesn't mean the Supreme Court might not agree with the Fifth Circuit. If it does, worst case scenario, to answer your questions, there's a lot of tools in the toolbox here. Either you incorporate USAC, this federally chartered nonprofit corporation that administers the Universal Service Subsidy Program. You can incorporate that into the FCC. Congress, I think, might actually act pretty quickly. If John Thune, Majority Leader from South Dakota, I've known him since he was in the House and served on the Energy and Commerce Committee. He knows this issue really, really well. It's very important to his state. It's very important to big, square, red states as well, and others, and blue states. And in New York City, the Lifeline program is administered by USAC, for instance, and that tends to favor urban and rural constituencies. So I think Congress actually would get its act together. That doesn't, I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But pretty quickly on that if needed. And I would think the court wouldn't just blow it up and say this has to stop the second this opinion hits the streets, because that would be very disruptive. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it'll continue on. It's had strong bipartisan support since the 96 Telecom Act, and went to Section 254, which set all this up. And by the way, there are other appellate courts over the years where this exact issue's been before them, which the Supremes are now going to resolve the split in the circuits, but have said, no, it's constitutional, and here's why. But we'll see. It could be the worst case scenario, and there could be complete chaos here soon. So.
And maybe just one follow-up on that. I mean, obviously, Brendan Carr and the FCC are defending the program, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on how the FCC could potentially reform this program. Assuming there is a positive ruling, everything stays as is, but obviously there has been movement to reform this program at the FCC level, at the congressional level. So how high on the priority list is that for Brendan Carr, and what are some of the tangible things that we may see on a 3-year or 4-year horizon?
Excellent question. So the last time there was any major reform of universal service was in 2011 when I was on the commission and worked very closely with Julie Shinakowski on that. And or he says in the old country, it's Zhinachowski, I think, right? Is that closer? Okay. So, it's a third rail, right? So the contribution factor, if you want to get into the weeds, is 36% now. That means all of you are paying about a 36% tax. That's a constitutional issue right there. But on your phone bills to support these subsidy programs. And it's a shrinking pool of revenue from which the government can derive funds to maintain the subsidy program. So, and it's been discussed many times, including during the ACP debate over the past couple of years, that maybe it should be just something that comes out of the U.S. Treasury. I don't know if that'll be, it's really hard to do. No chair has ever really wanted to tackle contribution reform. I tried calling for that. It was easier because I wasn't chair. I was just a commissioner. I could be a rabble-rouser. And I offered up a bunch of ideas. There are a lot of ideas to do contribution reform. But will there be reform? He's got to get a full commission first. And look, most of this year for he being Carr, most of this year for Brendan is kind of a waste on big ticket items, and that's something he would do maybe at the end of his tenure as chair, so a couple of years from now, after the 26 cycle and not too close to the 28 cycle, because it does tend to be controversial, although I don't think people vote on it.
Great. I'll pass it back to Chris.
Yeah, so I think it's Charlie Ergen who's actually been calling on your phone. Yeah, he could use the help. EchoStar's been flypaper for controversy, multiple commissioners, both parties. What do you think the FCC wants out of EchoStar? And if you were advising to Charlie, and we don't want to give him free advice necessarily, what would you tell him to do?
So we will only address publicly available information on this, not that I have anything else. But so May 9th, for those playing at home, Chairman Carr sent Charlie Ergen a letter saying, basically, I don't think you should have gotten your build-out extension. I don't think you're building out your network as required by the conditions on your licenses. So we're going to examine that. Tomorrow is the reply round, reply comment round, for re-examining the 2024 extension of his build-out. But we think it goes further than that. We think the commission is looking to take back some of those licenses. And meanwhile, you saw last Friday, of course, the default announcement, and then we'll see where that lands by the end of this month, I guess. And that puts a lot of pressure, by the way, both on the creditors as well as maybe the FCC. The FCC could, so the next best analogy is the straight path scenario. So in January 2017, the FCC came out with its biggest fine in FCC history, took back licenses, negotiated a settlement, but took back licenses from straight path and basically negotiated or let happen a private sale to Verizon. So Verizon paid straight path billions, and then straight path paid hundreds of millions, I think, into the Treasury for its fine. We call them forfeitures. So you could have something like that. I think that's a good template. That was all done at the bureau level, did not require an FCC vote, and many enforcement actions can be at the bureau level. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Charlie, but it's something to learn about Brendan Carr is he'll send you a letter saying he's going to do something, and then he does it. So he sent letters to the heads of PBS and NPR. Those are clients, but I'm not going to comment, but saying we're going to investigate you. And he did. He did send the letter to Bob Iger, but I'm not sure what he did after that, though, however. So sometimes it means he's just sending a letter, he's going to look at stuff, or maybe he wait to decide another day. But it could be the music has stopped in the game of musical chairs for some of those licenses, so watch closely. And I would look at the comments that get filed tomorrow. Some might not get filed till later in the day, so you might not be able to see them till Monday.
Would Charlie essentially licensing or sub-licensing some of the spectrum to the cable companies, say, or signing an MVNO agreement with those cable companies, would that satisfy the FCC?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I mean, one could say that's not build-out. That's not what the conditions on your licenses say. You said as a condition of the T-Mobile-Sprint merger that you'd be the fourth nationwide wireless carrier, but you may only be serving coastal cities and not smaller markets. So is that how you're getting to your 80% plus number of coverage? So POPs coverage. I don't know the answer to that. That could be, and maybe there's a settlement to be had, or maybe nothing will happen. I mean, Charlie's been very shrewd and lucky, and he also knows the appellate process. So we should talk about that for a second, which is he'll have ammo and can delay things for a while, right? But then there's the specter of bankruptcy, and I'll let the restructuring and bond experts in the room tell me about that.
All right, we've got a lot of other issues, but maybe we'll take a pause and see if there's anything from our audience here. Any you want to continue?
They all fell asleep.
Yeah.
Wake up.
Yeah, so we have a bunch more topics to hit on, but I guess just taking a pause and everything that we've talked about so far, I mean, are there any other key priorities that you see for the FCC at this point that we haven't already touched on, or anything that we should dive into further before we jump to the next?
Sure, I'll pull the pin out of one grenade, which is Section 230. Did you want to talk about that one?
That's on the list.
That's on your list? Okay. So, which is an open question, and certainly my law firm has clients who would be very concerned about Section 230.
Maybe you could just remind people what that is.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Section 230, the oversimplification, this came out of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And some people, it's also called the Communications Decency Act. But it is basically a liability shield for platforms, online platforms, when you're hosting third-party content. Well, that actually applies to more places than you think. It's not just the usual big tech suspects. It could be your local TV station where there are user comments. It could be retailers that have consumer reviews of products. Newspaper sites, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, it incorporates a lot. So in the first Trump administration, there was a lot of talk, and more than talk, about reforming Section 230, and the Department of Commerce filed a petition for rulemaking at the FCC in 2020, I believe, saying that liability shields should be loosened. Meanwhile, Project 2025, there's a whole chapter on this, and Brendan Carr, when he was a regular commissioner, talked a lot about this. We have not seen as much conversation about this recently, and that could be for a number of reasons. There are other priorities. It could be that the Trump administration is now interested in things like Truth Social or TikTok and things like that. So there are two schools of thought on will they or will they not do something on Section 230. And then there's the whole conversation of how much authority, rulemaking authority, does the FCC have under Title II, which is where Section 230 is housed. You can argue both sides of that, but we don't see anything imminent, and certainly not with the 1-1 FCC, so stay tuned.
Do you think that the FCC is the right venue to address concerns around misinformation and consumer protections?
Whoa, what define misinformation?
These sort of issues.
These sorts. So you can make the argument of Section 230 because it's in under Title II of the Communications Act as it was set up in 1934, that it has some authority here. I don't think the intent of 230 was for the FCC to have rulemaking authority, but then they shouldn't have put it in Title II, right? This could be a congressional mistake. There's a 1998 Supreme Court case, the IO Utilities Board case, that says basically the FCC has general plenary authority, rulemaking authority under Title II. So the proponents of Section 230 reform would say, well, yes, then the FCC does have all that. There is a memo from Ajit Pai's general counsel in late 2020 of the FCC, general counsel of the FCC, Tom Johnson, outlining why he thinks the FCC has all this authority. But a lot of it hinges on Chevron deference. I mean, you asked the follow-up question, so now I'm really going to put the audience to sleep, which was overturned about a year ago by Loper Bright. But that doesn't mean it's game over. So Loper Bright says that courts can weigh FCC interpretations of their rules, but the courts are not going to defer to the FCC's interpretations of its own rules or statutes, and that the courts are still the last referee. They have the last call. So if something happens, it will be litigated, but it'll cause a lot of disruption in the meantime. There is a question in the back. He woke up.
One second. Your mention of Title II gave me some PTSD on net neutrality, which is maybe dead, but I refuse to believe that it's dead. Like Freddy Krueger. Any chance that it comes back? In what form? How much of a free hand do broadband operators have to price their service today, you think?
Yeah, and that was part of BEAD, too. I didn't bring that up because I knew that was a wormhole vortex we'd get sucked into. But so it could come back in the form of strings attached and future
Talk about BEAD.
administration.
Yep.
Net neutrality.
Okay.
So is it a condition attached to a merger approval in future FCCs or future legislation? We saw also in the Infrastructure Act anyway, I won't go into that. But yeah, there's a lot that other future administrations could do, and future Congresses could do, and the states, of course. So you have the California law, which has become sort of the most regulatory common denominator of net neutrality, and that's survived litigation. So it could come back.
Yeah, if I can go back to 230 for a second. You talked about how this administration was looking to potentially loosen the shield part of that. Is there a chance that they tie the shield part to the sword part? 230 is a sword and shield. The sword is the moderating. The shield will shield you from doing that. But is it possible that you have to moderate a certain way for the shield to work now? Is that the way that they could be thinking about it?
Yeah, and good question. We don't know for sure. My guess is, to kind of simplify it for an audience with general knowledge, is that if you leave content up, you're better off than if you take it down. But I think it gets also into political speech, which then is a constitutional issue, right? So these are private platforms. They do have, for those who hated the Citizens United case of many years ago, many now are starting on the left are starting to like it for this purpose, which is editorial discretion, right? So if you want to take what's hate speech, for instance, what's misinformation, or how do you define these terms, right? It's in the eye of the beholder. So the oversimplification, but to make the point, is I think where they would lean is if you leave content up, you're better off. It's more of a safe harbor. If you start taking it down, you have to have a good explanation. But if you start making that editorial discretion, then you're just as liable as a newspaper, right? So you have the newspaper analogy versus the newsstand. The person at the newsstand, these things don't exist. You're very young. I'll explain to you later what a newsstand is. But so the newsstand seller, vendor, isn't liable for the defamatory content in the magazine he or she is selling. The newspaper is, because they have editorial discretion, right? So if they print something, they can be liable for defamation. So which are you if you're a platform hosting third-party content? And that's at the core of it, but I think it's the intent would be to keep political speech up and don't take it down. But I don't know. Who knows where this ends up? Because it's hard. It's complicated. That's why it hasn't happened yet. And by the way, you had people on both sides of the aisle for years. Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, Ted Cruz, all saying similar things on 230 reform. Joe Biden, even, on 230 reform. So, but it's never happened. And every Congress, there are a couple dozen bills introduced about Section 230. It doesn't happen. But we'll see. We'll see if it happens this time.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just a couple quick wireless questions. We talked a little bit about the cable transactions in terms of the FCC. There are also a few wireless transactions, with the biggest one being T-Mobile acquiring a large portion of assets of US Cellular. Is that a similar situation to kind of the cable transactions that you described, and the approval could be done at the bureau level, even at 1-1?
Yeah, as we saw with Verizon Frontier,
Right.
So those bureau level, and so yeah, you don't have to worry about those being held up. I expect approval of those here in the coming weeks. So there's the T-Mobile, but also AT&T, Verizon,
Right.
pieces of US Cellular too.
Yeah.
I just mentioned a lot of clients, so I'm not saying anything privileged.
Are there specific types of transactions, and we've kind of hit on this from a few different angles, that you would expect to face heavier regulatory scrutiny moving forward?
From the FCC, so, quote, big tech, really, FCC doesn't have a lot of jurisdiction, really any jurisdiction, only if you have an FCC license. Back to comments I made about sort of the Trump X factor, we just don't know. So three of the big networks, yeah, they might have a harder time.
Yeah.
They might not, but I would put them in the we're not sure yet category.
Okay.
We're almost at the 2-minute warning. Last call.
Is there anything going on with shortwave modernization?
Shortwave modernization.
That's the first time I've had that question in a long time. So, Adam Chase, would you like to explain what that is? 100%. No, okay. So, not that I know of right now. That was actually a priority for Commissioner Symington, and related to that receiver standards. If you want to get totally nerdy with me, but right now I don't know of anything. I can look into it and get back to you too.
It's like ham radio stuff.
Well, really, it's shortwave. It's a frequency band. But,
I'm kidding. So now I know what it means to when they say it takes an FCC lawyer to unwind some complicated issues. You've done a great job of that here. Really
Thank you for
appreciate
having me.
being
It's
here.
been a lot of
We've
fun.
gone through a lot. On behalf of everybody at Gabelli, thank you for appearing.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good job.